Hi guys, Sajid Amit here and welcome to another review on the Amplify YouTube channel. In this review, I will actually discuss what is currently my favorite IEM. So I have in mind the Thieaudio Monarch. I've listened to IEMs that are higher priced in the sort of $2,000 range and above, but of all IEMs that I've encountered, I think this is my favorite. And in this review, with that caveat out of the way, I'm going to take you through the aesthetics, build, and comfort of this IEM, the tonality, and finally technical performance. And I'll draw comparisons to two other IEMs I have with me. The first is the Dunu Zen, which comes in at a similar price range. The Monarch comes in at $730. The Zen is around $700, and the Dunu SA6, which is slightly cheaper, around $550. But I mean, one could argue if there is sense in comparing something that's $550 with, let's say, the Zen, which is slightly more expensive, and finally with the Thieaudio Monarch, which, like I said, comes in around $700. But I do think there's a lot to be said in terms of similarities, in especially technical performance across all three, with differences, of course, very interesting differences. Now let me just dive in. So in terms of aesthetics, build, and comfort, the first thing you notice with this is that when I saw this on reviews and I read reviews of this and saw photos of this, I thought this would be somewhat gaudy, this faceplate especially, but it's really not. I'm sure you can see this. This pattern is actually very interesting, and the lettering Thieaudio in person looks very nice. It's not engraved or embossed. It just has this nice way of standing out, which makes it look quite eye-catching, I think. But the most important and the most surprising element to me was that although people have said in the past that this is bigger than a lot of other IEMs, and I can be very sensitive, which is the reason why I tend to prefer headphones more than IEMs. With that said, I was very pleasantly surprised with how well it fit my ears. It disappears, honestly, despite the size. It's very ergonomically built. So comfort-wise, it's top-notch. The cable here is currently my favorite cable. I know Dunu gets a lot of street cred, a lot of praise for its wonderful cables. But honestly, I think this cable is better than Dunu's. It's very, very easy to untangle. It's very easy to coil. The quality is great to touch. It's not very heavy, and it looks fantastic. I love this white weighted cable. My favorite thus far. Thieaudio has done an amazing job. In comparison, I think the build quality of the Zen is up there. Dunu's build and construction is fantastic. The cable, which is very often praised, I think is heavier than I would like it to be. Like if I hadn't encountered the Thieaudio Monarch cable, this would probably be my favorite cable, but it's really not anymore. The cable still looks very nice on the Zen. It's this sort of gray and white silver thing going on. It looks very nice, but I think it's much heavier than the Thieaudio Monarch cable, which I like a lot. And the SA6 is also very nicely built. The face plates of SA6 tend to attract people, and with good reason, because they are very pretty. And so mine is orange. You can get, and you get different types of designs. And yeah, it's pretty cool. And the cable for Dunu, of course, has these adapters which allow you to switch in and out your terminations. So Dunu is famous for that, so that's there. But overall, in terms of aesthetics, build, and comfort, just because I think so, for the Zen is pretty easy to wear and comfortable. It's small. SA6 is slightly less comfortable than the Zen, I think. It has this sort of strange shape around here. I don't know if you can see this, and this protrusion, I think, bugs me a bit, right? And overall, I don't think this is as comfortable as the Zen, and by far the most comfortable IEM here is the Thieaudio Monarch. And because of its super ergonomic cable, I do want to sort of give the aesthetics, build, and comfort round to the Thieaudio Monarch. So that's that. Now speaking about tonality, tonality is why I really like this IEM, and of course technical performance as well. It really does everything, honestly. And I'm sort of giving away the review, but that's basically going to be the theme of the review. Tonally, the first thing you notice, as you might have heard, is its incredible sub bass. It's not incredible because it's like a subwoofer-like experience. It's not like a lot of raw sub bass, boomy energy, but it's a really well done sub bass. And because the overall bass shelf is elevated, right, which works really well. And people before me have said that this is not a bass head IEM, but this is an IEM that's not going to displease bass heads, because so what you find is that the bass elevation comes down at exactly the right point. And the way Thieaudio has handled this is phenomenal because there's no bleed into the mids. I love my mids clean, which it does have, and because of this wonderful way in which the bass contours into the mids, some people before me who are more used to, I think, thicker sounds have said that the mids can be slightly thin, which I don't think so. And I have a lot of interesting headphones for reference. For instance, I have the Susvara, the Biss TC, and the RAL with me, which are considered Summitfy headphones. And unless all these mids are thin, and I of course have encountered and experienced thicker mids like this Sennheiser HD650, which frankly, when I started out in this hobby, the 650 was nice and it felt lush and creamy. But over time, it started annoying me. So the mid bass hump tends to annoy me, and this is not just for me. I think if you hang around in stack circles, you'll see that a lot of people criticize the latest iteration of the Stax 007 for its mid bass hump, and there are people who find it nasty. Which is not to say that my taste is absolute, of course, but I do want to make the point that I think if people are saying that the mids here are thin, which it very well might be, they have a very different reference point. I think the mids here are perfect. So speaking of, so just to summarize, the bass here is not just good because of its sub bass, but the bass quality is very good. And of course, I'll cover more of that in the technical performance section, but it's very fast bass. It's very detailed bass. And then finally moving on to mids, the mids are clean. They're very clear. And so you get a sense of the reverb in certain tracks, if there is reverb. Vocals come off as very nice and lush. Guitars sound great. And finally, the treble here is quite unoffensive. There's treble energy here. Overall, this tracks Harman 2018 very closely, and I'm not necessarily beholden to the Harman target because my Susvaras, of course, somewhat track the Harman very closely, but the Abyss TC does not. And I'm one of those. I think headphones are about flavors. So if you like something like heavy metal and rock, I think it makes sense for you to like an Abyss over the Susvara. The Abyss is, like I've covered in my previous reviews, is more open and beyond the technical performance. The tonality itself of the Abyss is interesting because it's slightly V-shaped, which works really well with metal, much more than the Susvara. So that's there. So even the RAL that I have, the SR1, it doesn't have a Harman tuning. So I'm definitely not going to say that I prefer the Harman tuning always. But for whatever reason, with my IEMs, I love Harman tunings, especially ones that have an elevated bass. And so a lot of Chi-Fi IEMs have a Harman tuning, if you know what I mean. Aria does, a lot of Moondrop IEMs tend to, and I've really gravitated towards Harman tuning on my IEMs. So yes, overall the tonality is wonderful. It's quite neutral with the bass boost. The bass is mostly sub bass, but the shelf is interesting, and it's the thickness that the sub bass offers to the presentation is just wonderful. Because I feel like if it were just Harman, oftentimes a lot of tracks can become boring. To me, at least. But with this added bass energy, it just makes everything perfect. I've enjoyed all tracks on this. And even when I've had day-long listening sessions with the Susvara or the TC and I've switched back to this, I have not been disappointed. And I want to look for a headphone that can do this. Now, comparing the tonality of the Monarch with the tonality of the Zen, the first thing I want to say, and I hope I don't get criticized for this, the Zen was a shocker in terms of how bad it is. Honestly, the tonality. It is, I mean, I don't understand the hype it gets. Like, I've had people in my community, and both in locally and internationally, who love the Zen, and I respect them for that, of course. I'm sure they have reasons for loving the Zen. But tonally speaking, I think this is a tonal disaster. Now, bass energy-wise, there's some mid-bass punch. I do think this gets more praise than I think it should for its dynamic energy, which of course comes from its tonality and its technical performance. But the mid-bass punch is fine. I didn't think this was anything to write home about. And the mids are too forward. I mean, to call it shoddy would be an overstatement. I mean, after a long day's work last night when I was listening to this, the vocals just sounded grating. The guitars were too edgy and too in your face on a lot of rock tracks. And the treble honestly just collapses on itself. Like, there's no air energy here. There's almost no higher treble frequency. So what happens is everything sounds like cymbals sound so muted, like they sound abnormal, honestly. Like, you know how in heavy metal, a lot of drummers will grab their hi-hats as a way of speeding up the tempo. It just sounds like that's what's happening with every time there's a cymbal hit. Like, there's just no resonant frequency presentation anymore. So yeah, this IEM, I think, honestly, like, is not very well tuned. I like Dunu a lot for a lot of things that they do, like the goodies that they give you when you buy Dunu, and the cable, and the build quality, and their insistence on innovating, and their very high build quality. And they've also produced some interesting IEMs. But honestly speaking, this was a massive disappointment for me. I when I initially heard it, I think of a different DAP than my current. By the way, I should mention what DAP I'm driving all these three with. I'm using the Khan Alpha, which is a wonderful DAP, plenty of power and headroom, so you do get better stage than I think you get on other DAPs. But that said, I was so disappointed with the Dunu Zen. And yeah, I mean, I was once considering getting the Luna, but I think this just destroyed it for me. The SA6, tonally speaking, is much better. Some people call it a baby U12T. I don't think it's tonally the same as the U12T. The Zen is, I'm sorry, the SA6 is an interestingly tuned IM. To start with the bass, it definitely has BA bass. So there's almost no decay, right? It's fast, and of course, fast bass is nice, but without the decay, the bass doesn't sound right, and this still happens here. Some people have said that this is pretty good for a all BA bass, and it is, but it's still a BA bass, and I feel that even about the U12T. So I'm very sensitive to timbre. You might not be, and if you're not, and if you like BA IMs, because this is an all BA presentation, you might like this, because totally it's fine. It's a nice, pleasant tuning. It's somewhat upper mid, it's focused, the mid range, and I do think the mid range here is shoutier. So even when A-being from the Thieaudio Monarch to the SA6, this gets shouty on me, but nowhere near as shouty as this guy here. This guy I don't recommend at all. I think this can be a nice IEM if you don't mind the BA timbre, and it does work well with a lot of different genres and tracks. So now moving on to technical performance. So technically speaking, I've had the Andromeda 2020, and I've also had other IEMs like the 64 Audio U12T and the final Audio 8000, which I've sold off. But this, I think, in terms of detail retrieval, I think it's quite up there. Not with the, let's say, the U12Ts of the world, but I do think it gives the Andros a run for its money. It's more detailed than the Andro in the bass. It's as detailed as the Andro in the mid-range, and slightly less detailed as than the Andro in the treble. The Andro does have a nice treble extension, and is a way of presenting treble details very nicely. So technically speaking, detail-wise, I think this is wonderful. It is, I think, more detailed than the Dunu Zen. The Zen has it's a pretty technically solid IM, and I think it's quite good for its price. It probably punches above its price bracket for its technical performance. But I perceived more evident details with this. The details were slightly less, I think, pronounced on the Zen. And the SA6 comes close to both these IEMs, but just misses their detail retrieval by a hair, I think. But it's of course a $550 IEM, so it's much cheaper. In terms of imaging and soundstage, this is another thing that I think they surprised me with, because the soundstage here is fantastic. I do think my DAP had a role to play with this, because I've tried this with other DAPs and dongles, and soundstage on the Thieaudio Monarch does scale with the source that you run it with. So what happened with my Khan Alpha is that you get a beautiful soundstage, like it's wide and it's very coherent. So it's not left and right. It's very it's like an arc, and the soundstage is also thrown forward in front of you. And the imaging is beautiful. The imaging has been talked about a lot by people like Clinical, and I do agree. The imaging is quite good. You're able to position instruments quite well, and there's space around instruments. Overall, the sound staging and imaging is done very well on the Thieaudio Monarch. There's very little soundstage on the Zen, honestly. The soundstage is just not going to work for me. The soundstage is narrow, and it's just not a fun IEM to listen to. Like, honestly speaking, because of the lack of soundstage, I found this unlistenable. Dunu is coming out with an upgrade version of this, and they're calling it the Zen Pro. So I do think, once that comes out, this might actually be, that might actually be an important upgrade and something that people like. Dunu does listen to customer feedback and does innovate according to customer feedback, so I'm quite confident that that'll be an interesting item to listen to. Soundstage and imaging wise, this is fine for the price. It's nothing extraordinary, but it has good stage width and stage depth, and as well, its imaging is also fine as well. Moving on to speed and slam, especially dynamic slam. This is a very punchy and slammy IEM, the Monarch, and that's another thing that makes it so interesting. So it's not just sub-bass focused, right? And some people might nitpick and say this doesn't have enough mid-bass, which I'm very happy about, because I think too much mid-bass energy can cloud the frequencies above it. And I do think, so because this has such wonderful dynamic energy, so by that I mean, of course, the sort of the crack or the punch of in the bass because of, let's say, a drum hit or an organ sort of, sonorous deep bass, and also in the higher frequencies the sort of edge of guitars and sort of the sparkle of a string instrument and so forth. I think this does everything really well in terms of dynamic energy. It's a sharp IEM. Not sharp in the sense that it's piercing. It's definitely not piercing. The treble is very polite here while being detailed, but it's a very vivid and dynamic presentation, and which really works because it's a neutral IEM. So what Thieaudio did is quite amazing, because they took this neutral sound signature, added sub bass, and gave it a lot of dynamic energy. So it's never boring, but it never becomes one of those sorts of over lively and overly punchy and aggressive listens. It just sort of toes the line really nicely. Speed is great. The Dunu Zen, in my mind, also has good dynamics. It actually has dynamics that are, I think, on par with the Thieaudio Monarch. But because of the sort of congested soundstage and the very shouty upper mids and the lack of treble, I don't think the tonality here does justice to its technical performance, especially stage and because of lack of stage. In terms of dynamics and speed, the SA6 is decent. Again, it's quite fast, albeit IEM. The slam is, a BA slam, so it's not going to, blow your mind, but it is what it is. And finally, with regard to timbre, all these IEMs do timbre well, I think, with the exception of the bass on the SA6, which does sound very BA, all BA, and very plasticky to me. The timbre here is fine. Now, honestly speaking, just to summarize, the Thieaudio Monarch does everything well. It is my favorite IEM, and I prefer it to the U12T, which can get boring for me, and I prefer it to the Andromeda 2020, and I prefer it to the Final Audio 8000, which was my favorite before this, which is a very different sound tuning compared to this. It's brighter. I do tend to like different kinds of sound signatures, and I've experimented a lot, but I think as far as IEMs go, I've settled on this. Genre matching wise, like I said before, this will work with any track. This will work with EDM, heavy metal, jazz, vocals, acoustic, classical, hip hop, you name it. I've tried everything with this. It sounds amazing. Final word on on where I got this IEM from. I bought it with my own money from headphones.com, but a big shout out to the guys at headphones.com for hooking me up with this, because this is often not easy to find where I live, and it's also because I'm very impressed with headphones.com and the way they're building community, and beyond their audio store, of course, their reviews are fantastic and really worth watching if you are into audio. So big shout out to headphones.com for this IEM. So that's it for me. I hope this was useful, and if you like this video, subscribe to my channel and like this video, and stay tuned and stay safe during COVID. Bye.